everyone for coming. This is the, first of all, let's take all of these dirty cups and get rid of them. This is from the last panel.
Yes.
Should we take them away? Thanks. Good, thank you. Do I need to turn this on? No, it's working. Good. Welcome, everybody. This is the panel on youth and youth peace and the rule of law. Do we need to do anything here? No? It's just working. Fantastic. My name is Kerry Kennedy, and I'm the president of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you here today. We have just until 11:30, so let's get right to it. Let's start by talking about what we mean by youth. So one of my favorite quotes is actually from my father, Bobby Kennedy, and he said, "This world demands the qualities of youth, not a time of life, but a state of mind, a temper of the will, a quality of the imagination, a predominance of courage over timidity, of the appetite for adventure over the life of ease." So I invite us all to embrace that determination to overcome our timidity and seek a life of adventure over the life of ease. I just want to set out, I think that today our world is in crisis on many fronts. The climate crisis has had 3 continents in record heat waves as we speak, with China just yesterday declaring that they will address this global crisis on their own, in their own time, and without international cooperation. We see terrorism has swept the globe. War has broken out not only on land in Europe, but there are currently 32 ongoing conflicts in the world right now, ranging from drug wars, terrorist insurgencies, ethnic conflicts, and civil wars. There's economic upheaval, which is causing more and more people to turn away from the promise of democracy and freedom to autocracy and rage. A global pandemic still kills 10 million people a year, and the promise of more to come. And the nations of the world have failed to make adequate progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And finally, we face a technological revolution which promises more upheaval and failures of government to get ahead of the regulatory needs of technology that already exists. So, in the face of all of this, are you all completely depressed now? In the face of all this, what is to be done? So part of the answer, of course, is to turn to the rule of law. And that's really what our discussion is about today. So I'd like to start by asking our panelists to each introduce yourselves, tell us where you're from, and a little bit of the work that you've been doing on any of these issues or others, and then let's proceed with the discussion. So please start.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alexandra. I've recently graduated from the International Baccalaureate, and next year I'm going to the University of Nevada to study medicine. And I have not had the opportunity yet to know more about the world of law, but I have attended several debates and models of the United Nations. Thank you.
And where are you from?
Oh, I'm half Japanese, half Romanian.
Half Japanese, half
Romanian.
Romanian.
Yeah.
And you live where?
In Romania and Spain.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Angela Schembri Peña. I am from Colombia, also half Italian. I am a lawyer from Colombia. I graduated from international law in Paris Sorbonne, and I studied a master in environmental law in Externado University in Colombia. Currently, I am doing my PhD and I have studied climate change issues from an international perspective and focus on the Latin American region. Also, I apply that because I have worked in the Colombian government in some years. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.
Good morning to everyone. I am Álvaro. I'm very grateful to be participating in this panel and in this World Congress, which is taking place in New York. I am from Spain, from Madrid. Currently, I am studying law and business in Comillas University in Madrid, and I've been doing an internship as a summer associate in Weiss here in New York. So thank you to everyone.
Thanks, Álvaro.
Hello, I'm Toni. I'm also very thankful to be here. I want to thank Kerry for chairing this panel, such a role model on human rights issues, and I'm very happy to share this panel also with such distinguished young scholars from around the world. And yes, basically I studied in Regensburg and also at the University of Paris I, and I did my PhD in constitutional law.
Okay, thank you. And wait, Toni, did you say where you're from?
I'm from Germany.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you. You can see.
Hi, my name is Nick Rogers. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm barred in Georgia, and I went to the University of Mercer School of Law for my JD and the University of Florida for my LLM, my Master's in Taxation. And I have an interest in international policy for taxation.
Good morning, everyone. I am Leopoldo Lelo de Larrea. I am a Mexican lawyer. I studied in law in Mexico, and afterwards I moved to Spain to do a master's degree, and then I ended up working at Cremades Calvo-Sotelo, where I also started being part of the organizing team at the World Jurist Association. So therefore I have been at least trying to promote the rule of law for the past year and a half. And thank you so much for everything.
Thank you. And are you on our panel? No, you just sit here. You have a place at the table, and we're happy you're here. Okay. Okay, well, let's start with you, because you have helped organize this conference. What do you see your role, and how do you see your role organizing a conference like this, and what kind of change do you hope comes out of it?
Okay, so as per my role, I think just in a general sense, it's trying to organize, help putting everything together, get these very impressive people, jurists that help day by day change the world and that promote the rule of law. So I think that is my role at the World Jurist Association, to help this put together, organize, and just by doing so, it is how we also promote the rule of law. And
Good.
yeah.
That's perfect, thank you. So Nick, talk about the role of taxation and how governments can use taxation in order to promote rule of law and protect people's rights.
Well, I believe that, so in order for a government to sustain itself, it needs to have revenue, and it needs to be able to tax the citizens that it ends up protecting as a part of their society. So the reason it's a circular function of individuals coming together and creating a society, and then that society needs to be sustained, so we need to fund the society through taxation. And
Interesting. So are your clients going to be excited about your attitude that more taxes the better?
no, they're absolutely not going to be. I just think the taxes are necessary.
Right. Yeah, so that's going to be a challenge for you.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Colombia. You've been working on human rights and getting businesses to take responsibility for their impact on the environment and their impact on communities. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, thank you very much. In fact, I am doing my research about the climate responsibility of enterprises, and I think this is essential because the private sector should also have obligations and be another actor to fight against climate change. In Colombia, for example, I have been working in anti-corruption and transparency initiatives for the promotion of governance of enterprises, compliance, and due diligence for measure their impacts in environment. And also this affects a lot the communities, for example, for the mining enterprises, territory, indigenous people. So it's very important also to have access to participation and involve these communities, and to install a dialogue between government, enterprises, and communities in benefit of all the society, and to fight against climate change together.
Interesting. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because one of the big issues, of course, everywhere in the world is the failure of mining companies to work with indigenous communities and the collusion between the mining companies and the government. Talk about what works.
Yes, I think first of all, it's very important to have a justice energy transition. The transition to renewable energies is essential for this reason. Also, the participation of dialogue, public consultation, the access to information, the access to justice. In Latin America, we have the Escazú Agreement, which recognizes these rights in Latin America, and it's very important. Also, it's essential to guarantee the protection of human rights defenders and environmental defenders, which are threatened.
margin, and that law should be acceptable of everyone. And this is very important in the future because there are many issues, also, for example, related with science, such as cloning, that law must accept everyone and take into account the beliefs.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, one of the things you said, Álvaro, was that that we're losing our sense of ethics.
Excuse me?
That we're losing our sense of ethics in society. And I think one thing that people believe characterizes this generation is the skepticism about institutions. You know, and I think there's good reason for that. Political institutions have often failed. This, we've seen so many scandals with businesses. We've seen the, you know, the pedophile scandal within the church. We've seen what's happened with journalists who were once revered and now it had created so much division. So I think that there is a lot of skepticism about institutions, but you all have talked about the importance of the rule of law. How do you balance those two, the skepticism of institutions, but the importance of rule of law, which, after all, is protected by institutions of justice? How do you think about that? Please.
Yes, I think that it's essential to have trust in the institutions and in the rule of law, but also law must be related to social governance. So if there is a law that it's not applied, or if communities don't believe in this law, it will be very difficult to implement efficiently this law. So I think social governance and rule of law must be related in the first place, but also I think education is very powerful. Education of young generations, involvement also and participation. For example, as today that young people have a voice to speak about this challenge is very important. Have a voice and a space to speak about it. And I think that also rule of law must be dynamic. Rule of law was one rule of law 50 years ago. It should be another rule of law today to face new challenge. For example, climate change. There are basic principles as open government, justice, predictability of law, but that must take in consideration new challenge and evolve to have an efficient answer to this challenge. Because if not, it would be complicated to think that it is the same every day. So evolution, involvement, and participation is very important to have trust in rule of law and to make an efficient application of rule of law today.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
Yeah, as a Mexican, I believe that private institutions nowadays are somewhat we have to rely on. It's also something we have to rely on because when sometimes government fail to actually protect those that are governed, which is a struggle nowadays in Mexico and also most Latin American countries, that's when you have to also see how private institutions help the rule of law and how they help to somehow maintain checks and balances to keep a civilized and peaceful society and to uphold the idea of the rule of law as well.
Very interesting. Okay. Let's talk, let's explore that a little bit.
Sure.
Because I think, as Alessandra has pointed out, the private sector can also be responsible for denigrating the rule of law. So what do you do? What structures need to be in place to assure that the private sector is in compliance with the international human rights norms. And I'll just give this example. When I was a kid, of the 100 largest economies on earth, about 5 of them were corporations, okay? Today, 70 of the top 100 economies on earth are corporations. 5 years ago, it was 50. Today, it's 70. So that means, for instance, Apple has a bigger economic footprint than the country of Norway. So, as corporations have more and more control over our lives, it's increasingly important to hold them to those same rule of law and human rights standards that we hold governments, but we have the structures, at least in theory, we have the structures in place to hold the governments accountable, but not so the corporations. I think you've been working a bit on this. Could you talk about that? And I'd love to, and please be thinking about this because I'm coming back to the rest of you. But Alessandra.
Yes, in fact, in international law, there are no direct obligations to enterprises, but I think we should consider this because they are also accountable and responsible as states. As you said, there are multinational corporations that have economical power, a great influence also in communities. So they should be accountable, and how they could be accountable. For example, through compliance programs, through due diligence laws. There are a lot of initiatives. For example, in Europe, there is the discussion about the Directive of Sustainable Development and Due Diligence for Enterprises. And this is a discussion that has been in other countries. For example, in France in 2017, la loi de vigilance, also due diligence, was approved. So it makes that enterprises should be accountable for the impacts that they have in society and in environment, and they can, for example, make programs to prevent and to measure also the risk of their operations. And it's also important to involve enterprises in the dialogue with states. For example, there is currently the discussion of the Treaty about Human Rights and Enterprises in the United Nations. So if this treaty should be approved, it would be the first time that there is a treaty that imposed obligations to enterprises. So there are a lot of initiatives, and I think it's important to have also a consciousness in the corporate world, that they know that they are responsible and interested in their profits, of course, but also that they have the potential to be an ally to states and to society to work together and involve all their capacities in benefit of all the world, of protection of human rights and in the fight against climate change.
Very helpful. I'm curious, from a taxation perspective, do you think there's a way of using taxation to assure that corporations are accountable for these issues?
Sorry, I do believe that there is a way to ensure that they're accountable, but to a certain extent, at the bare minimum. Not further than that, unless they're going to be given more in the bargain.
Unless they're going to be given...
Unless they're going to be given more in the bargain for what their accountability would be increase.
I see.
Yeah.
Can you, think of an example?
So what kind of subsidies or some type of... If profit interest is, the bottom line, then what kind of benefit will they receive to ensure that they are meeting the standards and the extra costs that they're going to incur?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So that's the problem, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem. There's so much pressure on corporations to to maximize risk-adjusted returns for their shareholders. That's something that they have to take into consideration when they're going into a community and mining. So they're looking for the cheapest way of getting that out, and they're not financially motivated to listen to the communities. So that's my point. Through taxation,
Yes.
couldn't you change that?
Yes, but through taxation, so it would have to be a subsidy in a sense to ensure that these companies will be compliant.
Yeah,
Yes.
you could. You
You-
might do it through subsidy.
You couldn't tax them and then tell them to come.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Helpful. Thoughts?
Thank you, Kerry. I think that was a really good question. These days that I've been in Paul Weiss, I've learned many things, but one thing that I've learned is that there's a new idea going on, which is called in private companies, which is called ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And law firms are fighting really hard to implement the rule of law in private companies and to tell them that their corporate governance is very important, what they do with their employees and what they do to prevent all these problems that we're having in the world. So I think it's something that it takes time, but law firms are fighting really hard to taking care in the governance in the private companies, so they can be aware of climate change and all the problems that the world is bringing to us, and so they can take care of their employees, because a lot of people that have been working in big multinational companies, they're not happy in how they are treated. So I think apart from earning money, it's very important to take care of the people you work with and your clients. So that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Okay, so you're saying there are a lot of constituents. So one of the constituents is the shareholders, but another constituent is your employees. And another one is the clients, and another one is maybe the communities in which you work.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I want to come back to your first question and combine it with the second question. So from my point of view, rule of law means in its core the binding of the state actions or the state institution to the laws, and also the big companies are bounded to the law. And for me in the future, I think it's even more important that we have an independent and functional jurisdiction that control the laws. And of course, there will always be abuse of power within state institutions, but also in big companies. And therefore, it's even more important that the jurisdiction will keep functioned. And what my colleague has said before, I agree on the one hand that the jurisdiction has to develop further the legal order, especially the constitution, as the jurisdiction is able to interpret the legal order on the one hand, and to take into consideration future developments like climate change, etc. But at the same time, I think, and that's my biggest concern about the rule of law in the future, that the right balance between the jurisdiction and the political leaders or the political parties won't be there anymore. So I think we can witness today that especially constitutional courts have to find the final answers to very important fundamental questions. Like for instance, 2 years ago about climate change in Europe, but also about abortion, etc. And what we can see is that every judgment is very broadly discussed in the society, and there's the risk, even the judgment is correct, but there's the risk that society is drifting apart because a judgment doesn't have the same broad majority as an act of political parties, as an act of political majority. So I I think it's very important that even the judgment is right, that the jurisdiction, together with the other institutions of the state, especially the parliament, etc., the legislation, find the right balance, what they can decide or not. So I agree on the one hand, especially constitutional courts have a special role to develop further the society, but only within the laws. And they cannot be an active catalyst for future developments. That's the task of the political majority. Of course, constitutional courts have to control the politics and it's not decisive if there's a political majority, and protection of fundamental values is protection of minorities. But on the other hand, I would say it's important that they find the right balance when they should act. And I think it's not right if I know some people, or there's some tendencies, especially within climate law, that want to have very active constitutional courts who go beyond the constitution. So I think that's not right.
I see.
in the point.
So you're talking about the role of the judiciary versus the role of the legislature.
Not versus, together.
Yeah.
The statal institutions have to work together and find the right balance within their area.
I see. Thank
I
you.
think that's very important in the future.
I'm curious as to how other people to react to that, but I also want to bring in the audience. So I hope we'll be thinking of a question or two. We only have a few minutes left, but still, I would love to hear from audience members. So, any other responses to this?
Yes. I would like to refer to climate litigation. For example, the Sabin Center of Climate Change of the Columbia University has made the studies of all the claims against companies and states because of climate obligations. So it's interesting because what my colleague was referred is, for example, national courts, constitutional or civil tribunals that are pronouncing about international treaties about climate change and compelling companies for on accomplishing obligations of climate change. So if you see this, yes, there is some people that thinks that it's like a breach of powers. Other people think that this is a reflect that there is, for example, a lack of access to an international environmental justice because we don't have an international tribunal of climate change to enforce these engagements. So this is like a challenge today, how we make a balance between the powers of national courts and international legislation, and how we make effective the application of international treaties of climate change and environment. And it's something that we should continue to think.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions?
I'd like to touch. Sorry, I would like to touch on both those points. I think it's beneficial to think about how, I guess, the legislative and the judicial party can work together to strengthen rule of law, but also it's beneficial to think about the international competitive nature of different countries producing their own strengthened rule of law and competing for the economic benefit of their own country. But what bodies do we have to safeguard against economic competition?
This is more specific, but economic competition between countries, you mean?
Yes, it's the rule of law.
Yes. No, in fact, I think in this way it's important also the balance between the global south and the north and the countries of north. In this sense, for example, climate impacts are differential. Mm-hmm. Generally, in the global south, there are more negative impacts because in the global south there are more natural resources and communities are affected. And these are countries that don't have the financial resources to fight against this phenomenon that is universal. So I think that through cooperation, the financing of projects, the educational projects also, and working between all the governments, we can make like a balance of this economic difference and make equality and solutions for every country. So it's complicated, but I hope we can do it.
Okay, well, we have just 2 minutes. Oh. I'm so sorry. I asked for questions and now we're out of time. But we have 2 minutes left. We're just going to do a lightning round. And I would like to ask you each one thing that gives you hope. Okay, one thing that gives you hope. Please.
Should I start?
Yeah.
I would say, do we need to extend ourselves or we can just say one word?
No, whatever you
I would
want.
say, God for me gives me hope.
Oh, beautiful. Okay.
Yes, I agree. And secondly, there are many good people around. Yes.
Good people. And?
I think education and that have voice, that the people which cannot participate have voice and be included, meaning youth people as we today, and also communities, indigenous people, the poorest countries. I think education and voice are very important to change and to improve the world.
Beautiful. Thank you.
For me, is people from my generation, young people that are willing to fight for what they wish for.
Beautiful. I love that answer.
Yeah, I had actually prepared for this intervention, a small sort of speech, but I actually talked about hope in this speech, and what I thought about our generation and how I look at our generation is I look to the future with hope and determination, because our generation embraces principles such as social justice, such as equality and inclusivity, and that's something that particularly, and when keeping in mind peace through law, that completely gives me hope.
Beautiful. And?
Well, my wife and our future child gives me hope, but also I hope that just general skepticism is just us kicking the tires to continue the journey.
Beautiful. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming, for your thoughtfulness, for your commitment to the rule of law, for your curiosity, for your willingness to share today. And what gives me hope is being with all of you. It makes me really feel like we're going to be okay. We're going to have to work hard, but we're going to be okay. Thank you very much.